How's it going, guys? My name's Shane, and welcome back to a very special episode of The Horror Basement. Today we're going to be talking about Night of the Living Dead, George A. Romero's 1968 classic. Now, if you're new to this series or the channel, what I'm doing here on the classic horror review is endeavoring to review all 50 films of this set here, the Treeline Films classic horror 50 movie pack. And this is actually Night of the Living Dead is actually the newest film to be included in, even though it was back from 1968. The story is they actually had a copyright issue. For the longest time after it was released, the movie was in the public domain. That's why you see a lot of characters in other later horror movies are always watching Night of the Living Dead, because it was the most classic horror movie that they could use in other movies for free without paying anybody to license it or to use it. So we open on the opening credits as a car drives to a cemetery in a secluded part of Pennsylvania. Now, the scenes in the beginning serve a dual role as just something to look at while the opening credits roll, but also to give you a sense of the sense of isolation that's going to be an important part later in the movie, because there's scenes of this car just going, miles at a time, and they're the only ones there. There's no one else, no other cars on the road. You don't see anybody else until the characters get to the cemetery. Now, the people in the car are a brother and sister, Johnny and Barbara. They've came out to this neck of the woods from Pittsburgh to place flowers on their father's grave. And as they're doing so, Johnny starts messing with Barbara about how she's afraid of cemeteries and being out here, all by themselves. And this is where you get the famous, "They're coming to get you, Barbara," line that is so often quoted from this. It's actually funny. Despite the fact that I grew up with them and was constantly watching horror movies, there's really only two things that my parents know about horror movies. And it's the "They're coming to get you, Barbara" line, and the other one is, if you hear that means Jason's going to show up. So that's they're the two things they know about the genre. Now, of course, as they're heading back to the car, a zombie shows up. Now, as this was the movie to kind of popularize and canonize what we now think of as the zombie mythos, I'm going to be referring to the zombies in this movie as zombies. But it's important to note that they're not called that at any point throughout the film. They're called things, monsters, and weirdly at towards the tail end of the film, everyone settles on calling them ghouls. I think that was probably intentional on Romero's part to kind of distance himself from what zombies were perceived of previously. If you look at White Zombie, the movie, not the band, or King of the Zombies, it was always there was voodoo and black magic involved. So the first zombie we see ends up attacking Johnny, and in their scuffle, their fight, Johnny falls and cracks his head on a tombstone, and he's dead. And then the zombie starts to chase Barbara. And a couple other things that I found interesting is the zombies in this, the quintessential zombie movie, are actually smarter, I'd say, or more dangerous or well-equipped than what we see nowadays. Because I won't say this first zombie runs, but he definitely has he does a bit of a jog. And throughout the movie, you see these zombies actually using rudimentary tools. They'll pick up a rock and smash a window or smash a headlight, or pick up a stick and use it as a club. But this fellow chases Barbara, and she ends up crashing her and Johnny's car and running away into an abandoned house where she quickly locks the place up, realizing that there's not only this one guy chasing her, but there are multiple people outside displaying the same kind of weird symptoms. And even at this point, she's starting to go into shock, and not long after this, she basically goes catatonic and doesn't really play much of a useful role in the movie. But while she's still freaking out about that, who I would say is like the real main character shows up. Ben shows up in his truck and immediately bolts in and starts trying to get Barbara to help him barricade stuff and shore up the house, because sure enough there are more zombies coalescing outside. Now, it's important for the subtext we're going to talk about later to mention that Ben is the only black character in the movie. All the other characters that we'll meet here directly are white, including, I think, all of the zombies. I didn't notice any other people of color other than Ben. Not that the zombies had any real character, they were just pretty much extras that they slapped some makeup on and told to walk slowly. So Ben, with very little help from Barbara, is boarding up the house, and he's going out and setting fires to keep the zombies away, because also the zombies are afraid of fire in this one. And he actually ends up killing 3 zombies and successfully boarding up the house to where they have some time to talk and give their, like, really shitty day stories back and forth. And Ben says he was sitting in a diner and saw, like, a big gasoline truck with a bunch of zombies hanging on it, like, drive through a gas pumps and explode. And then he was surrounded by, like, 50 zombies, and he had to get in his truck and hightail it. But he was running out of gas, and that's why he stopped at this house where he and Barbara are now. And Barbara tells her recounting of what happened in the very beginning of the film with the first zombie we see in Johnny. And I'm not sure if this is a continuity error or that the point, it was intentional, that they made her recollection of the events very off from what actually happened. She gets bits and pieces of the opening scene right, but for the most part she's misremembering it and pretty much goes hysterical and gets up and starts, like, slapping and attacking Ben. And Ben gives her 5 right across the face, and then she just immediately faints. At first I thought he had, like, punched her and knocked her out, but he just kind of slapped her to get her to calm down. And she just, like, trust falls into his arms, and he puts her on the couch, and pretty much sitting catatonically on the couch is where she stays for pretty much the remainder of the movie. So then we're introduced to the rest of the cast, who end up coming out where they've been hiding in the cellar. And this would be Harry and Helen Cooper, and their daughter Karen, and a local boy named Tom and his girlfriend Judy. So Harry Cooper is the guy that comes up out of the basement first. And if you're watching this, you know someone like Harry Cooper. Like, he's that asshole that always thinks he's right about everything, and instead of trying to be constructive and work together, if anyone has any different idea, he just, like, poo-poos it and yells about how everyone should be listening to him and doing what he says. And the main conflict then becomes Ben thinks that they need to stay upstairs where they can hear the radio and watch the TV for news and board up so they can fight off the zombies if they start to break in. Where Harry thinks they need to all go down in the cellar and lock themselves in because that's going to be the safest place because it's the most. The door has a big like wooden slab you can put in front of it to like totally lock themselves in there. Um, and I think in his first scene, the guy that plays Harry says cellar at least like 25 times. Like he's like, "Get in the cellar! We gotta get to the cellar! Cellar, cellar!" So not long after all the characters are introduced, except for Karen. Karen is the Cooper's little girl who is laid up in the basement with a fever, and one of the things or the monsters uh, bit her on the arm. Which, with the benefit of hindsight of having lived through now 50 plus years of zombie movies, after this, we all go, "Oh shit," when we hear that. But she's there and she's not doing too well, so she's not really a part of the movie until later. But then they get a radio announcement from the guy on the news radio that is reports out of Cumberland, Maryland, say that the monsters or the things that are attacking people are partially devouring their victims. And why I make specific note of that is that Cumberland, Maryland is actually my hometown. Like, I'm coming to you, not live, but I'm recording this in my house in the city of Cumberland, Maryland. And I use the term city loosely. I'd have to say probably the fact that this is where they figured out that zombies eat people is the most notable thing I could tell you about Cumberland, Maryland. But it's pretty nice, and fall's coming up, so if you like leaves, you should come. So anyway, now that they're done shouting out my hometown, uh, Ben devises a plan to escape. Him and Tom are going to run out, get the truck started, go fill up the truck, and then swing back, load everybody in the truck, and skedaddle out of here. Because apparently, according to the TV emergency broadcast, there is a National Guard rescue station about 17 miles from where they are now, to where if they get there, there's food and supplies, and the National Guard are fighting off the zombies and all that. So they try to do this while Harry goes upstairs to throw Molotov cocktails out the window to keep the zombies at bay. And Judy, not wanting to be separated from Tom while they're going through this, she runs out as well. And the three of them get out to the gas pump, and Ben is like dual wielding a torch made out of a table leg, and in his other hand he's got like a Winchester repeater rifle. And he puts the torch down way too close to where they are pumping the gas, and so he can put both hands on the gun to shoot at the zombies as they come. But so really it's kind of Ben's fault what happens next, but as Tom is getting ready to pump gas in the truck, gas sprays out of the nozzle and gets from the torch to the truck, so that the entire back of the truck's on fire. And in an attempt to put the truck out and to not jeopardize the gas pump, Tom and Judy get back in the truck and pull away. But sure enough, the truck ends up exploding because the fire gets to the gas tank finally. And Ben has to abort the mission and go back into his house. Now, this is at the point where we get a really good, pretty much montage of zombies playing with and eating a bunch of body parts. Like I think this a dude takes a bite of an actual raw liver, like not a human liver, but probably from a butcher, and he like takes a bite of a raw liver, and there are people like pulling on intestines, and that's another thing. 51 years on, uh, people forget that back in 1968, the amount of like violence and gore depicted in this was super pushing the boundary. Like just 8 years prior, 8 years prior, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho scared the hell out of people, and you don't see anything in that. Like the shower scene, if you actually look at it, you don't see any cuts, it's just kind of like a little bit of blood. Um, and this was still 6 years prior to Texas Chainsaw Massacre in '74. So the amount of like headshots, people actually getting stabbed, and then you have a bunch of zombies eating what we are led to believe is human flesh. So it can't be understated how much this movie kind of pushed the boundaries as far as like late '60s go. So Ben gets back to the house, and shit is pretty much hitting the fan at this point. The zombies breaking in, are starting to break in, but also Harry tries to steal the gun off of Ben, and Harry tries to steal the gun off of Ben because he's tired of taking orders from Ben, and he wants to just, get in the basement and hide before the house gets overrun. But Ben like grabs the gun right back off of him and just like beats the shit out of him for a minute or two. Like it's not even close to being a fight because Ben's just like, what? And he picks up Harry again, what? And he ends up blooding his nose, and Harry has this like little prosthetic makeup on his cheek, which I guess is supposed to look like a shiner, but it looks like he has like a rash on his face. But not long after this, the zombies, which are now in the hundreds, start to break through the barricades they set up, and right as they break in, we see not only zombie guy number one from the beginning, but also Johnny, Barb's brother, happen to be the two zombies kind of leading the pack at the door. So Barbara, seeing that it's Johnny, like goes towards them, and she gets enveloped by the mob, and we can assume that she's just getting like ripped limb from limb out there. So Harry ends up going back down into the basement, and we see that Karen, the little girl, has in fact turned into a zombie herself, and she ends up killing both Harry and later Helen, who goes down there. So as the house is getting overrun, Ben has no choice but to ironically barricade himself in the basement, which is what Harry wanted to do the whole time. But he goes down there just as Harry and Helen are getting reanimated, and he double taps them both. He actually shoots Ben more than twice. Or Harry rather. Ben shoots Harry more than twice. I think 3 or 4 times in the head. Which is done off screen because even though this was pushing boundaries, there's still no like exploding heads. You're real like holding on the gore, like you would see in like 80s slasher type movies. So he ends up having to be barricaded down there, and we then cut to daybreak the next morning. Oh, and earlier on the TV, we saw a short interview with Chief McClellan, who looks like one of your dad's drinking buddies, who's just a small town cop, big beer gut, bullet belt, on over his shoulder, and him, Sheriff McClellan, and his Yeehaw Good Old Boys are taking action and going out and shooting the zombies. So he says, beat them, burn them, shoot them, just dis- destroy the brain and burn the body so they can't come back. Um, so that is, and that gives the characters hope. Not long before before they go and try to fill the truck and everything goes to shit. But it's daybreak and the zombies fail to break into the cellar, and Ben wakes up and hears shooting in the distance. So he emerges from the cellar with his gun, and sure enough, just as McClellan and the Yeehaw Boys are coming up on the house, one of them sees Ben in the window and shoots him in the head, and they drag Ben. They drag Ben out and put him on the big dead zombie funeral pyre as the end credits now roll over like still pictures of these rednecks basically with their German shepherds and their rifles trying to take out the zombies and all that. So this movie is kind of unique in a Shakespearean sense because all of the main characters were introduced to other than McClellan, who is kind of a secondary character, end up dying. So kind of a bleak movie, but as far as the subtext goes, obviously you can never separate a movie from the period it was made in. And this was late 60s, so it was back during the tail end of the civil rights movement and the civil unrest, that kind of thing. But I think beyond the obvious like racial connotation, with Ben being portrayed as the good and the moral center of the movie, whereas McClellan and Harry, who are, would traditionally be the center, like one of them's a cop and one of them's like the father of like a little nuclear family, they would traditionally be the lead or the moral center, or they'd be in charge. But so there's that racial connotation that like, no, Ben is in charge because he's the most capable and he's the one doing what's best for the group, and these guys are acting like violently or selfishly. Beyond just the racial thing, there's this the subtext where the people are really the monsters. Because in times of crisis, we have to band together to do what's best for the group. And Harry fails to see that, and he's selfish, and he believes that his way is the only right way. And of course, that ends up turning on him, and his own daughter ends up killing him. And there's also the idea that if society were to break down, the people who would end up being in charge are the ones that immediately jump to violence, like Chief McClellan. Now, obviously, you don't. It's not a bad thing to kill zombies if zombies were real, but just wantonly going from house to house and shooting everything that moves is not the best way to put back the civil order that was prior to the catastrophe. So overall, I really enjoyed the movie. It's really well shot for being essentially an independent film. You could tell George Romero even at this point, which I think is his first feature-length film, had a good eye for how to shoot a movie and how to create tension. And one thing I haven't really touched on yet is the music. Now, the music is, when it's there, it's super heavy-handed. But there are some scenes where the music completely cuts out and it's just the characters' voices and like crickets and the sound effects. And it's even something that my wife noticed during the opening scene, because the music is very, you know, tense and trying to create like a creepy vibe, and it's successful at it. And she just kind of looks up from whatever she was reading, and she's like, "Yeah, yeah, we get it. You're a horror movie." And I was thought like, "Oh, I didn't realize how just like heavy and atmospheric the movie was." And I was like, "Oh man, if this is just in the background the entire time, this is gonna be kind of a drag." But since it cuts out for the non-tense scenes where it's just dialogue, even if it's an argument between the characters, it's not really, the music is still kind of cut out. But then when the action's happening and the zombies are coming, the music comes back in and just adds another layer of depth and intensity to the scene. Uh, so yeah, overall, I'd say this is probably my favorite movie I've seen out of this pack thus far. Now, yeah, obviously it's one of the big named, like the classic, an actual classic as part of this classic horror set. So of course I would highly recommend this. And that's going to be it for this video. I just want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. Hope you subscribe. And if you enjoyed this, go ahead and check out the other movies I've done thus far in the classic horror review series. There should be a playlist that has all of them in order from first to however what I'm working on now. Alright, well, thank you all for watching and have a good one. Hi, it's me, Shane again. So like I said, this this review is part of a greater series where I review all 50 movies in this the classic horror pack, and I was so busy talking about Night of the Living Dead that I neglected to pick the next two movies that I'll be covering, so I'm going to do that real quick now. Alright. So we have The Brain That Would Not Die from 1962. And Attack of the Giant Leeches, 1959. So those will be the next two movies we're covering. Again, thank you guys for watching, and have a good night. For real this time. Bye.